What's up, party people? It's your old pal F here. Welcome and thank you for joining me for another edition of F Bombs. This is sort of my little corner of YouTube where I take a few minutes to talk about my long and colorful career in the animation industry, which at this point has spanned over 25 years, over a quarter century of making cartoons. And the whole idea is, my hope is that by telling these stories, if you're interested in getting into animation or if you're simply just a really big fan of cartoons, that you'll learn something from this and get something out of it. I'm not going to lie to you. This one is it's going to be special, and unlike my previous F bombs, I have actually put in some major preparation for this. I'm going to talk about things that I've never spoken of before, at least not publicly. I'm going to go into detail. While I'm not going to, I'm going to try and keep this as concise as possible. I would highly encourage you, if you are interested in getting into the animation or media industries, there's, God is in the details. And I think there are a lot of bits of useful morsels in the details of this story. So much so that, back when I was in my 30s, I actually got paid by colleges to go from college to college and tell this story. So now I'm going to give it to you for free, and there's a reason for that because my ascent into the world of animation was very different from the way a lot of people get into it. So I'm really hoping that by hearing this, you can learn something and you can apply it to your own lives, especially right now because the animation industry is in, to put it lightly, a tumultuous um, period. A lot of people are scared. Nobody knows where it's going, and that's understandable. And I'm hoping that by the end of this video, you'll have learned something that will hopefully make you feel a tiny bit better about things. Maybe give you some ideas as to how you should proceed with your own career. And regardless of whether or not you're thinking about getting into animation or already in animation, I really feel like this story has some valuable lessons just in terms of, overcoming adversity and taking risks and just sort of pursuing your dreams, for a lack of a better way of putting it. So, um, but all that being said, for all of the trials and tribulations that the animation industry is going through right now, I do actually believe that we're on the cusp of a true sort of animation renaissance where, frankly, uh, independent productions are going to start becoming a louder and louder voice um, for the global audience out there. And it's very, very exciting. I'm not going to name specifics, but you probably know all the ones I'm talking about. And there's probably many that you don't know about yet. There's a ton of really wonderful independent animation out there, and I would encourage you all to support it all. Some of it is very, very slick and professional looking, and others are, rougher, and you can tell that, they didn't have a lot of money and they didn't have a lot of resources. But that's the appeal of them, is that they're raw and cool. It's okay to like classical music and garage band rock at the same time. That's kind of how I see these things. So um, I would highly, highly encourage everybody support independent animation. And on that note, one of the reasons I make these F-bomb videos, and I try to be very transparent about this, is because, the channel that you're on right now, Fountain's Pen Cartoons, we are an independent studio. And I myself personally do not have the resources to pay my crews. We are all together working on making brand new free cartoon content just for you. We're going to keep making cartoons, and we're just going to stick them up on YouTube at no cost to you. We're doing it because we love it, and the reason I'm doing it personally is because when I first got on Twitter a few years ago, there seemed to be an intense desire for a lot of people who wanted to get into the animation industry, but they didn't have any experience. And so my whole thing was, well, I didn't, I can't pay anybody. It's not as though I can, just cut a check. And and the whole, crowdfunding thing seemed overly complicated. So my whole thing was, well, I'm going to start a mentorship program, and in exchange for my one-on-one mentorship, I'm gonna give people experience, so that making cartoons and treat it as though it's an actual animation studio. Because of course, one of the great paradoxes in not just the animation industry, but in a lot of industries, is that you can't get a job without experience, and you can't get experience without a job. So while I'm not in a position to cut people paychecks, I am in a position to give people experience, and that's what we're doing at Fountain's Pen Cartoons. That being said, I would love nothing more than to be able to pay people, but in order to do that, we need to be able to monetize the channel, and in order to monetize the channel, we've already reached the minimum subscriber milestone. But now we have to meet the minimum hours watched milestone, which is something like 4,000, which is kind of insane, given the fact that the cartoons that we're creating are all, I think the longest one is going to be 10 minutes long. So getting up to that monetization rate is going to be a bit of a drag. That is why I'm creating some of these longer form videos with the hopes that I make them interesting enough that you'll want to watch the whole thing, and it'll get our watch hours up, so that we can monetize, so that I can pay people in actual money and not just in experience for making these cartoons. And as you can see behind me, we're very soon going to be premiering our very, very first cartoon, Flotchy, Notchy, and Tip, which I already, we dropped the teaser trailer, and people have already responded to it with thunderous applause. So I'm feeling really good about it. I think you guys are going to like it. So please, 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 and I'll wrap up the the pitch for this momentarily. But please, it costs you nothing to subscribe. As I said, it costs you nothing to watch this video here. And while I am going to try and make this super interesting and keep you entertained and engaged, it's helpful to us if we just get the watch hours. So if you just play this video and leave it running, that's no harm, no foul as far as I'm concerned. My feelings are not going to be hurt. So, again, I don't want to. One of the reasons I didn't start a crowdfunding, and by the way, God bless you people who do. I just had to keep this extremely simple because my schedule is always really tight, and I wasn't going to have time to juggle so many things at the same time. But I forgot where I was going with that. Anyway, the point is, we didn't want to charge anybody anything. We didn't want to go for your money. So that's why we didn't do a crowdfunding thing. So please, it costs you absolutely nothing to subscribe. It costs you absolutely nothing to watch these videos and help us, bump up our watch hours, so that we can get to a place where we can actually monetize, and hopefully I can actually start cutting people checks. Now, the good news is, lest you think I'm taking advantage of anybody, we are all having a blast making these cartoons. Nobody is kept on a strict schedule. Nobody is, nobody gets yelled at if they miss a deadline. It's all of us just doing it for both fun and learning. And so that's kind of our commitment, which consequently is why our cartoons sometimes take a little longer to come out. So anyway, like I said, I'll wrap this up. Please, at Fountain's Pen Cartoons, please like, share, subscribe, and tell as many people as you can, and help us reach that goal. Okay, on to today's F-bomb. How I got my start in the animation industry. Well, it would be remiss of me to tell this story without first going into the fact that I didn't really, as a kid and as a young adult, I didn't really have any aspirations to get into the animation industry. I always loved cartoons. Bugs Bunny is my absolute favorite cartoon character growing up. I thought he was hysterical, and those cartoons, watching old Looney Tunes cartoons is like going to church for me. So those were my absolute favorite cartoons, and of course I loved all the ones that everybody else loved. I loved all the classic Mickey Mouse cartoons and Hanna Barbera and all that stuff. Um, but as a kid, I would watch cartoons and I would read comics. I was all about stories. I was all about stories with interesting, fun characters, and so wherever I could get that, that's what I would gravitate towards. So obviously, I loved comics. I loved cartoons. I loved the Muppets. Like anything like that that was fantastical and whimsical was that was my favorite stuff in the world. So obviously I grew up watching cartoons and really just imbibing them. Every Saturday morning, back when Saturday mornings were the only time to watch cartoons, I would sit there mesmerized for the first several hours of my Saturday morning, and man, would I get bummed when they ended. Um, and I think part of me, just sort of always hoped that if I watched these cartoons enough times, and if I watched them with enough, sort of sincerity, that eventually I would get sucked into the TV and I would become a cartoon. Like I loved them so much. But then as I started to get older, and I learned how the animation process worked, I would always see on the Wonderful World of Disney every now and then they'd show, here's how we made Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and they would show this footage of these guys. They would draw Dopey from Snow White, and then they'd flip a page, and there would be a drawing of what looked like an identical drawing of Dopey, and they would flip them, and you'd see this tiny bit of movement, and they'd be like, "Yep, that's how cartoons are made." And I would see stuff like that and go, "Oh, no, 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 not for me. No, thank you." Um, because for me, it was never about the drawing. It was about the storytelling, and it was about the character. Like I even from a very young age, I was already creating my own characters, and I wanted to tell stories using those characters. So, once I got a little bit older as a kid, and I started learning how the animation process worked, I was like, wow, that is fantastic. Good on ya. I will continue to admire and study the work of Fritz Freeling, Chuck Jones, Ub Iwerks, all of the Nine Old Men, all of the titans and founders of the animation industry. But as for being an animator, no, thank you. So, my next immediate sort of love. Now, I loved comic books, but I always, when I would think of comic books, I would think mostly of superhero comics. And when I was growing up, the sort of funny comics had sort of stopped existing so much, which was a real shame because I inherited a bunch of comics from my uncle that were from like the 50s and 60s, and a lot of them were humor. They were there was just a wide array of humor comics, and I loved those along with my superheroes. But I started becoming aware that in terms of the comic book industry, there wasn't a lot of room for humor comics, and I've always preferred humor as a vessel for storytelling. Even when I've created stuff that was meant to be either dramatic or fantastical, I would always, I love humor. I love making people laugh. I feel like laughter is just one of those things people don't get enough of. So, so comic books didn't seem like a way for me to go. Plus, it also that also seemed like, you had to draw the way the characters had always been drawn, and like I said, I wanted to have a direct relationship with the audience from here to there. And as I got older, it seemed like the best possible way to do that was through newspaper comics. Um, and I had started getting hip to comic strips from like the very very beginnings of comic strips, like Crazy Cat and Ignatz and Popeye and Little Nemo and Slumberland. But even among all those, my very very favorite was Peanuts. And I related so much to Charlie Brown and Linus were sort of like my id and super ego. So those two characters and the conversations they would have, and then of course the hilarity of Snoopy and Woodstock and all those guys, it was just the right amount of humor with pathos that really sort of spoke to me. And so, and like I said, I loved the idea of this is going straight from my brain straight to the audience. So again, going back, I at that point I didn't have a desire to get into animation. Now my thought was, oh, I'll create some really compelling characters, and eventually, much like my new hero Charles Schultz, they'll get made into cartoons, and other people will do all that heavy lifting and grunt work for me, and I won't have to do it myself. Um, but that turned out to be my goal, and that's where I sort of put all of my thoughts. Which by the time I got to college, I had been reading things like Doonesbury and Bloom County and stuff like that, stuff that was a little edgier, and I'm like, ooh, that's for me. Bloom County was a huge influence on me. And so was Doonesbury. Doonesbury was overly political, but I loved the use of a comic strip for both humor and social commentary and that sort of thing. So I'm like, ooh, that's for me. That's what I'm gonna do. And I'd heard that both Burke Breathed and Gary Trudeau got their starts doing their comics in their school newspaper. So when it was time for me to go off to college, I knew, okay, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to get a degree in art. And my thinking was, I'm going to get a degree in art and I'm going to get a secondary degree in education so that I can, teach art at the professorial level. But then while I'm doing that, I'll do my comics, and hopefully one day one of them will hit big, and that'll just be my career, is to do my own comic strip. Um, so when I got to college, one of the first things I did was I went to the college newspaper and I said, "Hey, I want to do a daily comic strip for your newspaper." And much to my surprise, they said sure. And much to even more to my surprise, they said we'll pay you. I think I got $10 per comic. Now, unlike a lot of college newspapers, I went to Western Michigan University, and the name of the newspaper is the Western Herald. It still exists. Hi guys. Um, but much to my surprise, they paid, and they would pay $10 a strip. And uh, unlike many college newspapers, the Western Herald actually was a daily paper. They printed 5 days a week, and then they printed one weekend edition. So in the late 80s, that meant, like, for me, $70 a week just to write and draw a comic strip. $70 a week, back around, circa 1988, 1989, that was a fair amount of money. And I was still living at home. So, for me, this was like, oh man, done and done. So that's when I started doing this. This was my college comic strip. And by the way, this book is out there if you want to get it. There's a young me. As you can see, the whole hat thing has been ubiquitous throughout my life. And yeah, I mean, I did a daily comic strip, and it was I think other people had done daily college comic strips, but like so many people um, in college, they wind up getting so wrapped up in partying and all that kind of thing that they miss their deadlines or not on time. I took this very, very seriously, which is why after doing it for 3 years, a local publisher came up to me and said, "Hey, let's collect it into a book and we'll put it out there." By the way, this stuff is now currently, when I look at it, a tremendous embarrassment to me. The first 3 years are actually the worst 3 years. If you can find the latter years, which I printed up as mini comics and would sell them at comic conventions, those are actually really quite good. I'm kind of proud of those. These are an embarrassment to me because this is the product of a fledgling creator who just they're very indulgent. They're very obviously semi-autobiographical, and it's very obviously just me sort of learning to be a storyteller. But and this is where this is lesson number one. This was great training for the animation industry. Why? How? Huh? You're asking. By doing this comic, I was forced every single day to draw and write, draw and write, draw and write, and tell a story with my pictures. That was tremendous discipline. And I had to meet my deadlines, and I had to deal with editors. Now, for the most part, I never got edited. Very rarely would anybody say, no, you can't do that. But it was there, and I had to work with other people. So this was fantastic training. So if there's a lesson one in this equation, it is this: if you're not currently working in animation and you're trying desperately to get to make yourself better and get some experience, you need to find a vessel with which you work on your craft every single day. And if you have absolutely no other choices, the only person who can, sort of make you do it is you. But and that's another reason why we at Fountains Pen Cartoons, why we're doing what we're doing, because it gives us an excuse, it gives us a motivation to do the work every day. So that's how I sort of got my taste of blood in terms of creating characters and telling stories, and that's when I really learned just how much I love telling stories. So college continued. The comic strip was actually hit, and I found myself thinking, well, this is going to be my career. I'm going to graduate, and this is going to get picked up by a newspaper, and that's I'm going to stay in my hometown where I went to college, Kalamazoo, Michigan. I'm going to stay here my whole life, and I'm just going to be this big fish in a small pond, and it's going to be great. But what I discovered as time went on was getting your comic strip into a newspaper, and of course this was pre-internet, and getting your comic into a newspaper was really, really, really hard. I was told that most newspapers only accept one new comic strip every 10 years because everyone's been reading the same comic strips for the last 100 years. So after rejection after rejection after rejection, I started thinking to myself, okay, well, this whole comic strip thing is not, it's not proving to be very promising. And it was also right around that time that I had started becoming aware of the independent comics movement that was going on in the late 80s and early 90s, with the likes of Emma Dorkin and Kyle Baker and Love and Rockets, the Hernandez brothers. There was just a ton of cool black and white independent comic books, and I started getting hip to them, and I was really into them. I'm like, oh, well, this is what I should be doing, and now I won't be constrained to these 4 postage stamp size drawings every time. Like this is the way to go. And so that led me to, and right around that time, I'd also sort of, well, now that I'm into independent comics, I'm going to do my research and I'm going to get some more independent comics. And that's when I learned about Robert Crumb. And I looked back on his career. And by the way, this is another little lesson thrown into the myriad details of this story. When I became interested in something, I started researching it. I started reading Robert Crumb, and then I was just like, well, these are bizarre and amazing and sometimes really distressing stories, but I want to know more. How did this begin? Where did it start? How did it reach the point where it is now? Because whenever I would hear people talk about, oh, I'm doing an independent comic, well, who are your influences? They would always say Robert Crumb. So I researched him, and I researched Zap Comics and how he had gotten a little bit of success, and then one of the first things he did was get a bunch of other artists together and decide to do a comic called Zap Comics, where it was an anthology of lots of different work. And I'm like, that sounds really, really cool and fun. I want to do that. And other people were doing it at the time too. It was the early 90s was a great time for independent comics, and you'd have just groups of folks, doing comics for each other and putting them in anthologies and putting them out there. And I still have a bunch of mine from people you'll probably never hear of, you've never heard of before, but they're out there and they're super cool. And so I decided, all right, I'm going to use the tiny bit of local fame that I have, and I'm going to put out an independent comics anthology. And that's where this came along, Bulk Comics. Um, and I rounded up, other cartoonists in the state of Michigan, and even at my own college and stuff, and we did 8 issues of this, and for a small town indie comic, they did pretty good. These were two of my first non autobiographical comic characters, Mad Dog and Cosmo. Which, if you pick up this book, you'll see pretty quickly that they're a pretty unintentional but nonetheless obvious ripoff of Evan Dorkin's Milk and Cheese. Um, that being said, I really loved working in this format, and I really loved the sort of grassroots process of doing independent comics. So um, it was right around that time that I was looking like I was ready to graduate, and but I was having the comic strip was still going, even though I wasn't getting picked up by other newspapers. It got picked up by one or two other college newspapers somewhere around the world, and that was the other thing about my college newspaper, is it was nationally distributed. So at that point in my career, my biggest sort of cash cow in terms of selling my artwork was doing that comic strip. So as a result, I wound up staying in college for, I believe it wound up being 7 years, mostly because, I wanted to keep doing the comic strip, and my actual college studies wound up becoming more and more irrelevant for every year I was there. But what I also discovered was, while I was working at the newspaper, I became friends with all of the other, journalism students and stuff there, and photographers and sports writers, and just all the people, and found them incredibly interesting, lovely, fascinating people, and they became some of my best friends. And so I became interested in journalism. Now, this is another sort of major lesson in the details of this story. Um, by being around newspaper people, I was like, oh wow, journalism's pretty cool. And I don't have a minor yet. I had been minoring in English. So I had quite a few hours racked up in English studies and in creative writing and all that kind of thing. But I'm like, oh wow, I should study journalism. So I wound up, directing my minor towards journalism. Now, what that wound up doing is, as I became further involved with journalism, I was not only doing a daily comic strip for the newspaper, I did illustrations for the newspaper, and I also wound up becoming not just. I started out doing art reviews, and then went on to do movie reviews, and then wound up becoming an editor at the paper, and wound up being one of their regular writers. So once again, I put myself in a position where I'm not only writing and drawing every day, but I'm writing using a completely different discipline. And this is the advice I give so many people who want to be writers, and none of them listen to me. So this is key. If you want to be a writer, and if you want to be a great writer, in my humble opinion, the very best thing you can do is take journalism and work as a journalist for a while, because um, learning to be a journalist and learning journalism writing is like becoming a writing ninja, because you have to be efficient, you have to be fast, and you have to be descriptive. And you have to learn to tell your story, or tell the story, in as few words as possible, while still describing it in a way that'll keep the reader engaged. I mean, come on. And consequently, as the years went by, and even after I got out of journalism, I would apply the disciplines of journalism to my creative writing, and as a result, my writing was always, it was a lot more concise, it was clean, it was always descriptive and always engaging without being overly verbose, like this video. So anyway, so at this point, I'm both writing as a journalist, but I'm writing my daily comic, and I'm doing bulk comics. And we're doing that, like, I think it was once every 2 months or something like that. So life was pretty good. I was having a grand old time just doing what I was doing, but I also knew that I couldn't stay in college forever, as tempting as that might be. Um, so I started really, really working hard to try and parlay the experiences that I'd had into something that could take me into an actual career. And at this point, I wasn't exactly sure what that was going to be. I would do a lot of illustrations for other college newspapers. Um, and of course, in my hometown, I would, whenever anyone needed an illustrator, a lot of times they would come to me. But it was nothing that I could build a career off of. So at one point, while I was probably in my fourth or fifth year of college, I learned that our university had a media department, and it was really small. It was exactly one guy. His name was Fritz, and he was great. Um, and the media department existed so that if professors or if staff or if the faculty or whatever needed some sort of media with animated graphics on it or something, that they could come to the media department, and that was the media department's job, was to put together these sort of semi-animated PowerPoint presentations and stuff like that. Because again, bear in mind, this is probably around 89, 90, 91. So, everybody didn't have a MacBook that they could just bang this stuff out on, so they relied on the media department. So I show up at the media department and go, hey, do you need anybody? And the guy running the place already knew about my comic strip, so he's like, "Oh yeah, I'd love to have you here. It'd be funny," because he had been an aspiring animator himself, and I guess had worked at Disney for some period of time as well. So, that's where I started learning about digital animation. Like Photoshop was this relatively new phenomenon, and he showed it to me. And prior to this, I was literally like dunking a quill into an ink well, and inking my comics that way. Meanwhile, he's showing me Photoshop and he's showing me Illustrator and all this stuff, and I'm like, oh wow, this is amazing. So slowly but surely, I started learning those programs, and he even showed me a couple of animation programs. I forget what they were called back then, but now again, we weren't doing anything interesting. Like I said, we were doing like PowerPoint presentations, and I remember one of the first assignments we got was to do a quasi-animated kiosk um, for the school lobby. Anyway, point is, I was doing the equivalent of clip art. And that's what I did a lot of. I did a lot of like clip art, just art that was very generic looking and not very interesting. So I wasn't finding the job terribly exciting, but I also knew that I was learning like a lot, and I had a key to the place, which means when school was over and when I had done all my work for them for the day, and by the way, that paid a little bit too. So for all of the stuff I was doing, I was mostly making a living off of art. Um, I still pulled some hours at the restaurant that I worked at when I was 16 and stuff like that too, just to make ends meet. But most of my income at this point, it came from the comic strip, doing caricatures and stuff like that at parties, and working at this place. And so, I'd started to get a taste for, oh wow, maybe I can make a career just out of doing my art, and I won't have to have a real job. So, and like I said, I had keys to the joint, and once I was done with my work, I was allowed to use the facilities however I wanted. And so I would go there and I would, learn photo. I would teach myself Photoshop. I would teach myself, how does this work? How does that work? And plus, I'd be able to use the printer facilities. So I would run off a million mini comics that I would sell at local conventions and stuff like that. So again, I had to do some really dull, boring work that didn't pay a whole lot. However, um, it provided me with training that I never would have gotten otherwise. Um, so after about a year of working in the school media department, it was becoming clear that I really needed to graduate. It had to happen. So, and I didn't really want it to happen, but it was like, oh, geez, I'm pushing on 8 years of being at this school. It really is kind of time for me to go. And right around the time that that was happening, the guy that had hired me, Fritz, who had hired me at the media department, um, was in touch with a local production company that did local commercials and local, TV spots and stuff like that. And he was like, "Hey, they need someone to do some character designs, and they need some very sort of classic Looney Tune style cartoon designs for this big project that they've got going on at this local production house. Do you want to be in touch with them?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And so they put me in touch with this very local production house. Now, this too is another major lesson. If you are not in New York or Los Angeles or Toronto or any of the other animation hubs, look around your town. Practically every town or a town nearby has some small production company, and at least some of them have animation departments. Um, and so I got in touch with mine. They interviewed me. The guy looked at my work. He was thrilled with what he saw, and so they hired me on a freelance basis to do some character designs for and some storyboards for live action commercials that they were shooting. So that was my first experience doing a storyboard. It was for a live action. I think it was like either Sears or J.C. Penney or something like that commercial, and it was really fun. And I showed an enthusiasm for it. And they had one other animator working there at the time, and boy, was he ever stretched thin. Um, and so I just made myself very, very, very available to them. And I got chummy with them right out of the gate. And because I was like, oh wow, this is a company. These people come into work every day and they get paid to do this. So in particular, the other animator that was there, I was like, oh, I want to do what he's doing. So and on top of that, he was an incredibly nice guy. I don't know if he wants his name mentioned here or not, so I'm not going to mention him by name. His name is Ken. He and I became fast pals. He was just a nice guy in general. We were into a lot of the same stuff. And by the way, this is where I got introduced to Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. That was a comic that he introduced me to, which would eventually lead to me being on Invader Zim. But anyway, so I met Ken, and he showed me the facilities they had. They literally had one of those old style Leica cameras that was pointed down. They still did animation in the most traditional, old school kind of way. They did have a digital painting facility, but they it was brand new. It was considered very clunky, and it was. And they did have digital editing, but it was still it was way before any of the stuff that we're used to now. It was all very, very, very old school. And I remember thinking, oh boy, this is the type of stuff that I didn't want to do. But I was also like, well, I'm now graduating college. I've got to do something. Um, and I didn't want to live with my parents anymore, so I needed a paycheck. So I became very chummy with these people, and would look for excuses to say, even though I wasn't getting paid for absolutely everything I was doing, if I saw that Ken needed help on something, I'm just like, oh, let me do that. I'll help you with that. Let me do that. Let me do that. And um, you know, the argument could be made, oh, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have worked for free. Well, okay, maybe, but what that wound up leading to was, eventually the company, for as small and local as they were, they expanded a little, and um, they were getting some good outsourcing gigs, because at the time that all this was going on, this is in the early '90s, and The Simpsons was hitting huge. And so and there was a resurgence in interest in animated films and stuff like that. So tons of little studios all across the country were getting outsourced for stuff, including this one. And so they were going to expand their animation department by exactly two people. They hired, and so being the one who made himself thoroughly available, and friendly and engaging, that I was one of the people that got hired. Um, so now I'm working like at a production company full time. Like I have a full time job, doing whatever needed to be done that day. On some days I was doing in betweens. On other days I was doing character designs. On other days I was helping out with editing. But I was working at a small production company. And one of the things that they were working on at the time was a little educational cartoon for Sesame Street, and I did in betweens for that. And I don't know what happened to it. I have never seen it since then, but for me that was a big deal. And then in addition to that, right around that time, the booming field of CD-ROM games was exploding, and um, at that point, like literally everyone had a CD-ROM game or a CD-ROM storybook, something like that. So uh, everyone was doing them, and then all of the sort of mid-sized digital animation studios would outsource to even smaller studios, which is how I came to do a bunch of work on a project called Zootopia. Now, this is not the Zootopia you're thinking of. There is a CD-ROM game out there called Zootopia that I did all the character designs for, and I directed some of the cartoons for. But it's an educational CD-ROM that is meant to educate kids about animals from around the world. So, and the thing is, I wound up doing a short cartoon for that CD-ROM that I later on I wound up selling to MTV, and they showed it on Cartoon Sushi. But that's a whole other story. So anyway, so now I'm learning about CD-ROMs, and I'm like, oh wow, this is a whole other realm of media that needs animators and needs character designers and that needs stuff like that. So um, they're having me do all kinds of stuff. There's again, like practically every book or film has got a CD-ROM based on it, and so I'm doing a lot of stuff like that. And after doing that for a while, one of the sort of mid-sized studios that was outsourcing to us liked my work, and they were looking to expand themselves, and so they basically poached me from my hometown studio. And this is where local boy makes good, and I finally moved out of my hometown. It was a company in Detroit called Media Station. I'm pretty sure they don't exist anymore. And as far as I'm concerned, good riddance to bad rubbish, because they wound up firing me eventually. But it was actually, they were a great company to work for, and I met many people there that I'm still friends with to this day. However, so they hired me. I moved to Detroit, and I finally got my first taste of leaving my comfort zone. And this is yet another sort of major lesson to be learned from all this. Um, I had never aspired to leave my hometown. I was going to be one of those people that just stayed there forever and quietly did, my comics, and just, like I said, lived as a big fish in a small pond. Um, but so, they were offering me more money, and I was like, well, this is really pretty awesome. So, um, so I picked up. I said goodbye to everybody, and I moved to a suburb of Detroit called Ann Arbor, Michigan. Beautiful place. Go there for the summer art fair. It's a good time. And I was working at this CD-ROM studio for a while, and and this studio was doing outsour- outsourcing for things like Barbie and The Lion King, and if you give a mouse a cookie, like I said, everything had to have a CD-ROM at that time. So now most of what I was doing was pushing around pixels to help animate people, but the whole time I'm doing this, like I said, even though I'm saying to myself, "Oh, this job is not that interesting," I was learning the whole time, and I was learning stuff that I never would have learned on my own, and I certainly didn't learn any of this at college. So my thinking was, okay, I'm getting paid, and I'm learning stuff that I would have learned otherwise. I'm basically getting a paid education here. So. And they were super nice people that I worked with, and that was another thing that sort of came out of that was, again, I had sort of aspired to be a loner, but I was forced to sort of get out of that comfort zone and learn to work with people, learn to take notes, learn to take orders, and all that sort of thing. So after a couple of years of doing that, now at this point, I've seen my images move. And boy, that was like a shark tasting blood for the first time. I realized that there was a whole realm of storytelling that you could do in animation that you simply couldn't do with comics or comic strips. And I still loved my comics and comic strips, which is why I still do them. But something about having music, sound, camera motion, all these things suddenly became fascinating to me all over again. Especially since now I was learning how to do things digitally. The days of flipping the pages over were slowly but surely creeping away. And so I'm like, oh, okay, so this is getting more and more interesting. Plus, I'd also learned that there's a position in animation called character design, which had always been my thing. I love characters, and I love creating characters, and I love giving them stories and putting details into their faces and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, my goal now is to be a character designer for animation. And while I'm doing character designs for animation, I can also do my comics and my own cartoons and stuff like that. But I'm going to be a character designer for animation. Now, at this particular studio, that wasn't they had a lead character designer at the studio, and he had been there from the beginning, so they were not going to replace him with me. But he became a good buddy of mine, and I learned a lot from him. And he was very into the animation industry, and he was telling me, "Oh, this is what's happening in Hollywood right now. Hollywood is booming." He had talked about moving out there because of The Simpsons, the success of The Simpsons. Every studio was creating its own, animation department and blah 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 blah. So, he introduced me to Animation Magazine, and I started reading Animation Magazine and sort of getting a feel for what was going on in the industry. Um, and it all became fascinating again. Suddenly, all of my misgivings about animation, as an industry had dissipated entirely. The internet was blossoming, and so I would get on animation news groups, and I would read from people who were in the industry and stuff like that. And again, I would read Animation Magazine very very religiously, and I became fascinated by it again. And right around that time, also, um, Fred Cyber was making a big bang in the industry, and there were, I was hearing about things like, Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls, and Ren and Stimpy had been around for a few years at that time, but I had been hearing the stories of like, oh wow, these are just guys like me who pitched a cartoon and got it picked up. And the next thing they know, they're making their own cartoons. And the more I would read about people like Craig McCracken and Joe Murray of Rocko's Modern Life, which is, I think, just one of the most brilliant cartoons ever. I read about these guys and go, ooh, I could do that. I have a million ideas. Because remember, at this point, I had created a comic strip, I had created comic book characters, and I had been writing and drawing, writing and drawing, and writing and drawing. So I had a million ideas. So the more I started thinking about this, the more I started thinking, wow, I should start sending my stuff out to the various studios. And via Animation Magazine and via the blossoming internet, I would get, the forms for how to submit stuff to different networks. And I had also started to see the writing on the wall for the CD-ROM industry. It was clearly, I'd heard about downsizing and how CD-ROMs were collapsing, and because for a while there were a couple of CD-ROM studios in practically any at least halfway decent sized town, and in fact, because I could sort of smell that our studio was getting ready to close, I had started poking around to other studios outside of Detroit. I interviewed at a place in Chicago, blah blah blah. But here too is another big lesson. I was very very happy and very very comfortable at the job I had, but I did not take for granted the fact that, look, just because I'm having a good time now doesn't mean that I'm going to be here forever. And sure enough, um, down the road, the company, downsized, and I was one of the first people to go because I was one of the newer ones. Um, so seeing that writing on the wall very early on and going, okay, I'm having a good time here. I'm going to do a good job at the studio, but I'm also going to start preparing. And one of the things I was doing to prepare was beefing up my portfolio and beefing up, and coming up with different stuff to put in it to show, my range. And um, and again, what was great about having a job like that is I could go in after hours and work on my own stuff. And so during this whole time, I'm putting stuff together. I'm learning how to dump stuff onto a videotape, and that's where I eventually came up with this. This is my, yeah, you probably saw a teeny bit of my old address on there. It doesn't matter, I don't live there anymore. This is my demo reel that I would send out to all the various studios, and I would, on the back of it, I would put my my resume and what I had done so far. And so I was working. I was working around the clock to try and beef up my experience and show that I'm capable of wearing a lot of hats. But so while all this was going on, I would put together these videotapes and I would send them to studios in Los Angeles, New York, and Florida, and all around, and all around America, to say, look, hey, here's John Fountain. Here's what he can do. Now, I didn't even realize at that particular time that I wasn't even, I was only marginally aware of schools like CalArts and Sheridan, so I didn't realize just what a novice I was. But much to my surprise, because the animation industry was experiencing a boom at that time, my reel did get looked at. I didn't get any jobs. I got rejection letter after rejection letter, but what would happen in that process is I would send my tape off to these studios, and then by utilizing both the internet and my own ingenuity, I would get the phone number of like Nickelodeon, of Cartoon Network, and I would call to follow up and be like, hey, and I would be very polite and I would be very engaging, and I would be like, hey, I'm just calling to see and make sure that my materials had arrived. And I made a point whenever I would call these places to be very, very, very friendly and engaging, and if at all possible, spark up a little conversation and turn on what I had learned to do at this point, turn on the charm a little bit. And I learned people's names, and I would call them by name, and I would say, hi, how are you this morning? This, by the way, all counterintuitive to my personality prior to all this. But shock of all shocks, I discovered that when you're nice to people and when you remember their name and when you're friendly and engaging, they're willing to do stuff for you. So, and they're often nice back. I know it's a shock. So, so even though I was getting tons of rejection letters, I was learning people's names, and I was becoming educated as to how the studio system works, because they'd be like, well, yes, your stuff arrived, but we have to send it to so and so. Oh, who's so and so? Who's that? Oh, that's how it works. Oh, okay, that's really good to know. Thank you so much for your time today. Blah 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 blah. So while all this is going on, and I'm casting a wide net, I actually heard back from LucasArts in San Rafael, because LucasArts, which is Skywalker Ranch is George Lucas's company. They were in the middle of doing what everyone else had been doing at the time, gearing up a CD-ROM division. And they looked at my work and they're like, "Oh wow, you've got experience in CD-ROMs. We're starting a CD-ROM department. Would you be interested in interviewing with us?" Now they're in San Rafael and I'm in Michigan, and I'm like, "You betcha I would." And I'm like, but let me ask you this: I live in Michigan. Are you gonna fly me out there to interview? Because that had happened to me a a couple other times for a Detroit and a Chicago job, and they're like, "Oh no, 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 no! We don't fly people out here. We don't do any of that. If you come out here, we would like to interview you, but number one, we can't guarantee you a job, and number two, you're probably not going to be seriously considered for the job unless you live in California already." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's a that's a bridge too far at that particular time." But then practically the day after that, the company that I had been working at and having such a good time with had fired a bunch of people, me being one of them. So I suddenly found myself without a job, and it was kind of, like either move in with my parents again, or find another job, or move to California. Now, I didn't want to move back in with my parents. They were lovely, but I did not want to move back in with my parents. Um, uh, so the first thing I did was I traveled all around the state of Michigan looking for another CD-ROM animation job because that's what I knew and and I thought, okay, I'll bide my time, and then maybe as time goes on, maybe I'll think about possibly taking a trip out to California and interviewing with some people. Um, but I traveled all around the state of Michigan, and for that matter, all around the Midwest, looking for another CD-ROM job. And every single place I went to was experiencing the same downsizing that my company had experienced, and there just were no jobs. So and this is where it gets really profound, people, because this is one of those sort of watershed moments. I was faced with the prospect of either moving back in with my parents and trying to sort of eke out a living doing freelance art, freelance stuff like that, or pack up my car and drive out to California, where I had been promised an interview at LucasArts, and really just roll the dice. I knew exactly one person in the entire state of California who, her name was Anne, and her husband Ed. They offered to let me crash on their couch and use their address as my address if I wanted to come out and do interviews for jobs in California. They were the only people I knew in the entire state of California. So I was like, ugh. Every bone in my body wanted to just stay in Michigan. I had never been to California, never driven across the country. I don't think I had driven any further away from my own hometown than like Chicago, which is not that far. So this was one of those big, big watershed moments where I was like, I had no aspirations to ever leave my hometown. I was comfortable. I knew everybody. Oh, and by the way, I had a girlfriend that I was crazy, goofy, very much into. We were having a great relationship, um, but we hadn't been dating that long. And so I discussed it with her. I discussed it with my family. And like I said, every bone in my body was just like, just stay here. Just stay in comfortable Michigan. But there was something in the back of my mind that said to me, if you don't try this now, you will probably never get another opportunity. And if there were ever a time when you should roll the dice and take a big, big risk, it is now. You're not married. You don't have any kids. You don't have any dependents. No one is counting on you really for anything. This is the only time you'll probably ever be able to do anything like this. So after very, very, very careful consideration, I sold off practically everything I owned. I had a little two-door hatchback Toyota something or other. I sold off practically everything I owned. The rest I left at my parents' house. My mom was good enough to call AAA and have written down for me the directions from Kalamazoo to San Diego, which is where my friends were, so that I could follow the directions to the letter. Keep in mind, no GPS, No, nothing like that. Just a roadmap, these written directions from AAA, and my little piece of crap car. Um, Now, what's interesting while all this was going on, and so I had made the decision that I was going to leave. One of the interesting little sidebars, by the way, was that while this was all going on, I was actually approached by Fisher Price Toys and interviewed with them uh, to take on a job as a toy designer. Um, and they had given me a toy design test, and they're like, okay, you take this test, and if we like your work, we'll hire you, but we'll pay you to do the test. And so these are some of the this was when they had first started talking about rebooting the Fisher Price Little People line. And yeah, these were some of the designs I did for that. So these are my original concepts. And what's interesting is, they flew me to Buffalo, New York, and interviewed me, and I visited the site of the place, and really thought that they were going to hire me, and that was going to be the direction that my career went. And what's funny is I did all this work for them. You saw the drawings, and then I turned it in. And even though that they had agreed to pay me for doing the test, they're like, "Well, we don't like your designs enough to pay you for them, so we're not going to pay you." And I was like, that wasn't the agreement. And I had it in writing. I'm like, "You need to pay me." So it turned into this whole big, ugly thing. Um, because the fact of the matter is, I didn't have any money, and I needed the money that they promised to pay me. Like, that was going to help fund my trip out to California. Because I literally, I didn't grow up with money. My parents didn't have any money to just hand me and go, here, have fun in California. I had about literally $50 to my name, and I think Fisher Price owed me, I think, $1,000 is what the agreement was. And man, did I need that, because I was packing up to go. I needed the money if I wasn't going to get the job. And they'd said, we're not giving you the job, but we're also not going to give you. So I had to get a lawyer involved, who thankfully worked pro bono, to get them to pay up. So I'm literally, I'm on the verge of making the biggest roll of the dice of my life, and I'm absolutely broke. And these people are refusing to give me the money that they owe me. So anyway. Sorry, I need a break for some coffee. So, like I said, I sell off everything I own, pack up my car, and 90% of my car is taken up with my computer, scanner, printer, everything I need to either make animation or print out resumes and create reels. So it was it was my computer monitor, which of course was enormous and weighed 3,000 pounds, a little TV with the VCR connected to it so that I could transfer stuff from my computer to a videotape so that I could, like I said, make these reels. Then my printer so that I could print out resumes, all this stuff, and then a few items of clothing and a couple of creature comforts, all just literally jammed into this tiny car. Which I could feel it when I was driving. It was lower to the ground than it was supposed to be because it was so heavy with all this stuff. Meanwhile, I'm going to be driving across the country. It's going to take a few days. I'm going to have to make some stops. And, like, in order to protect my investments, I literally took bicycle chains and I chained these things to the inside of my car so that they wouldn't get stolen. So I finally made the plunge, and I left Kalamazoo. And on the day that I hit the road, I want to say it was either a January or February of 97, 96 or 97. Just humongous snowstorm in Southwest Michigan, all along the route that I was driving, and so I visibility was terrible. And then on top of that, literally, I'm probably about 2 or 3 miles from the Michigan-Illinois border, when a Michigan cop pulls me over and informed me that I was driving too fast, or even though it was completely deserted. And I got a speeding ticket on my way out of Michigan. To me, that was the sign that, like, okay, it's good that you're leaving, because Michigan just said goodbye to you in the in the rudest possible terms. So I'm leaving the state and driving across the country for the first time in my life. I'm absolutely terrified. And but since then, I've learned that if you're terrified of a decision, you're probably making the right one. If it's either scary or inconvenient, you're probably making the right decision. So anyway, driving across the country. I of course can barely afford to stay in any hotels. I'm mostly just sleeping in my car. I'm trying to think. I think I stayed in a hotel one night or something like that, and it was in a really horrible, seedy part of whatever town I was in. Um, and and of course, like I said, I've only got probably about $50 to my name. Now I packed up a bunch of food and stuff, but nonetheless, every now and then I had to stop and like get food, get gas, and every time I would stop to get anything, it would be like, oh, this is just less money that I've got to spend when I get there. So, and then I'm driving through I would go miles and miles and miles and wonder, oh gosh, I hope I'm not lost. And then finally see some sort of landmark. Oh, okay, that was the one thing. I never got horribly lost. But then I came across a little thing called the Colorado Rockies. And in order to get to where I was going, which was San Diego, where my friends lived, um, I had to drive through the Colorado Rockies in the middle of the night, and it started pouring rain. So it's the middle of the night, almost no visibility, and I'm driving through the Colorado Rockies, and I can just barely see out of sight of both windows. Like if I swerve 1 inch in the wrong direction, I'm plummeting to my death, and probably no one will find me for decades. So once again, I find myself in this situation where I'm absolutely terrified. I've never been further away from home in my life. I've never been more scared, and this was just horrible. I had no money. There was just no good thing about it, and I kept thinking to myself, God, uh, like this is a drive across the country. This is so Simon and Garfunkel-y. I should really be enjoying this, but I couldn't enjoy it because I was so scared and stressed of everything that was going on. So I get through the Colorado Rockies. I go through Texas Panhandle, and finally, I pull into California, and I start seeing signs for San Diego, and I'm like, oh, thank goodness. And boy, I had never been to California. I had only ever seen it portrayed in television and movies. And boy, when you've never been to California and your first stop is San Diego, circa 1997, man, oh man, I was like, oh, it's no wonder everyone moves here. This is beautiful. Holy cow. The weather was perfect, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. So, but like I said, I'm broke. So I get to my friend's house. They let me crash out, and my immediate thought is, okay, let's get this ball rolling because I don't want to be crashing on their couch indefinitely. And I'm just one of those people. I don't like borrowing things. I don't like freeloading. I don't like handouts. I don't like favors. But I needed it from these people, so bless their hearts for putting me up. So I'm crashing out on the couch, but literally like the next day, I'm sending out resumes and I'm making more copies of my reel. I'm going to Kinko's. I'm having stuff printed, yada yada yada. And at this point, LucasArts had said to me, "Okay, we're very excited that you've decided to move to California. We will definitely have you for an interview." So they set up an interview, and they asked me, "Could you show us that you are capable of drawing Star Wars characters?" And I was like, "Lady, I've been drawing Star Wars characters since I was 6 years old, so you betcha I can." So these are some of the drawings that I sent to them, and they liked them. Um, this is Princess Leia in different styles, obviously. This was, now again, bear in mind, this was right around, 1996. This was my um, drawing of a young Yoda. Young as in, I would put him as sort of maybe knocking on the door of middle age here, but this was my conception of Yoda as a younger, angrier, much more sort of headstrong Jedi. Um, um, this is my drawing of Luke Skywalker trying to raise the X-wing from the Dagobah Swamp. Here's Han Solo, and boy, you can find all the mistakes that you want in these drawings, but for the time, Harrison Ford was at least one of the hardest people I've ever drawn. So I was actually fairly happy with how that turned out. This is my concept of a Z-wing fighter. As you can see, the wings like sort of fold down and then fold up into a Z shape. Surgical assault fighter with a little dome in the center. Just, a sort of glamour portrait of Luke Skywalker. I hate that one, so I'm not going to show it. Now, what's really funny is, again, there's just a creature that I designed with the idea being that this creature was all muscle and all tendrils. And it was interesting because, like I said, this is from around 1996, and a creature very similar to this would wind up appearing in Genndy Tartakovsky's Clone Wars series. Now, I don't for even one millionth of a second believe that I got ripped off. I just think it was one of those things that people have similar ideas, and sometimes they just there's a cross path pollination that goes on. So and then this too was one that I liked a lot, an Imperial sort of stealth droid. So yeah, those things got me an interview at LucasArts, and I was during my time at the CD-ROM studio, I had done what I sort of considered to be some much more sort of standard issue character designs. There was, I don't know if you guys knew about this show called Gullah Gullah Island. It was a kid's show. I did some very sort of Bruce Timm inspired versions of the people on that show. Again, and this is all stuff I didn't get paid to do it. I just did it so that my portfolio would have some range. So anyway, I arrive in San Diego. I immediately, of course, run to every CD-ROM / local media house in San Diego, of which there were hundreds, thank goodness. And I figured, well, surely out of all these hundreds of media studios in San Diego, surely one of them will hire me. Not a one did. Because again, at this point, I was no longer a big fish in a small pond. I was a very tiny fish with almost no experience in a very big pond. So, but the one thing I had going for me was that LucasArts had agreed to interview me. So, I'm staying in San Diego. I think it was just a few days after I had arrived there. I was like, okay, I need to drive from San Diego up to San Rafael. Now, you probably don't know the layout of California if you do, but San Diego is in the southernmost part of the state, and San Rafael, which is near San Francisco, is in the northernmost part of the state. So I literally had to drive from the very bottom of California to the very top of California. So once again, there I am back on the road on a really long road trip. Now, thankfully, by this time, Fisher-Price had finally paid me the money that I had, so I had money for gas, and I was able to spring for one hotel night when I went up to go interview with LucasArts. And my feeling was, well, this LucasArts interview is going to go great, so I'm just not gonna worry about money anyway, because they're probably going to hire me, and I'm probably going to have a job. So I drive all the way up there, get there, brought in the one suit of nice clothes that I had, showed up with all of the stuff that I had been working on to show them my range. The interview went absolutely wonderfully. The woman who interviewed me was an absolute gem. Her name was Colette. And at the end of the interview, she's like, John, I want you to know it being in touch with you has been an absolute pleasure. We really like your work. We don't have anything for you. They were staffed up. And that was that. And there was no sort of well, are you going to need anybody anytime soon? And the indication was just that no, they are all set. So, as you can imagine, I was thoroughly, thoroughly devastated. That was my one roll of the dice, and it had come up snake eyes. So, feeling very, very, very dejected. And of course, meanwhile, there I am on Skywalker Ranch, and I'm like, oh, this should be the time of my life, and all I feel is depression and despair. All I could think about was the horror show of the drive from Michigan to California. All I could think about was getting fired from my old job. All I could think was, what if this was the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life? And it was tough. Like, I literally, I went back to my hotel room. I was just like, I can't even really afford this hotel room now, but here I am. It's already paid for. I can't go out and enjoy, San Francisco on any level because I don't have any money. I don't know what's next. I had no idea what to do next. I had already been applying at San Diego places and not gotten so much as a nibble. Yes, Los Angeles was around, but I didn't know who was hiring, who wasn't. I had no real leads for any actual jobs. I needed a job. So there I was, feeling very, very, very dejected. Got back in my car the next morning, drove the long, long drive down from the top of the state of California back down to the bottom, and boy, did it feel like I was driving down to the bottom. Now, as I had mentioned, for the 2 or 3 years leading up to this, I had become very committed to reading Animation Magazine. And oh yeah, well, see, there you go. There's the date. It was right around March of 1997. Animation Magazine at that time was the source for animation news. And at that time in Los Angeles, the World Animation Celebration was going on, sponsored by both Variety and Animation Magazine. And at the time, it was literally like what the San Diego Comic-Con is, but just for animation. So it was huge. There was a job fair. There was, there were screenings. People would take pitches. It was the event in animation, and I've been reading about it this whole time. And as I'm driving down from San Rafael back to San Diego, I start seeing signs for, Los Angeles in 30 miles, Los Angeles in 20 miles, Los Angeles in 10 miles. And I had it in my head because I had this very copy of Animation Magazine in the car with me. The Animation Celebration was going on as I was driving through California. It was the last night. It was probably March 30th. It was the last night of the event. And I thought to myself, ugh. And by the way, it's getting dark. It's probably coming up on around 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening. And I'm thinking to myself, and guys, pay attention. This is an important part of the video. I'm like, here I am at another crossroads. It's the last night of the festival. The job fair is probably closed. I frankly probably should not spend the money it would take to get admission. I'm tired. I'm depressed. I'm sad. All I want to do is get back to San Diego and crash out on a couch and cry myself to sleep. That's all I wanted to do. I'm like, even if I could afford to go to the animation celebration, um, no one's going to hire me. The job fair is probably closed. I every bone in my body was like, just go back to San Diego and crash out on the couch. And at the very last minute, I saw a sign that said exit Los Angeles right here. And at the very last second, I veered off the road and took the exit to Los Angeles. Again, Los Angeles, a town I had never been to before in my life. Did not know my way around. Pulled over, checked out the map, did my research on the map, go, okay, here's where it's located, here's how I find it. Got lost, got severely lost twice. But eventually found my way to the Pasadena Convention Center, which is where I believe it was held. And guys, I cannot stress this with enough vehemence. It was that decision where everything turned around. It would have been so easy for me to just go back to San Diego and crash out on the couch and feel sorry for myself. But at the very last second, I veered off, and it was that decision that made all the difference in the world. I show up at the convention center, like I said, broke, $50 to my name, and I show up at the doors, and I'm like, oh, is it too, and there's people like literally taking stuff down. I'm like, is it too late to get in? And they're like, well, yeah, I mean, they're like, it's towards the end of the convention. I mean, and I'm like, look, here's my $50. Please just let me in. And they're like, you know what? And I couldn't believe they did this. The two guys at the door, they're like, you know what? It's the end of the festival. Just go on in. So at that point, $50 saved is $50 earned. I'm like, yay! I can buy dinner tonight. So I get inside. I'm all just absolutely thrilled. And so I'm like, oh, this is great. This is great. This is great. So the first thing I do is go to the job fair. And I go to the job fair, and there's all the booths for all of the major studios were there. And I was starstruck because there they all were. And by the way, like I said, this was when an animation boom was going on. So Warner Brothers was there, Fox, Nickelodeon, MTV. They were all there. They all had booths. And every booth at the job fair had a line that seemed to go around the block 10 times. And I was like, oh, golly, there's no way I'm going to meet anybody at the, there's no way I'm going to get to show my portfolio at this job fair. However, and this is another one of those milestone moments, I said to myself, okay, they're closing down. There's no way I'm going to get anyone to look at my portfolio at this job fair. But what I am going to do, because in the 1 or 2 years prior to all this, because I had become acquainted and friendly with so many of the people who were the sort of gatekeepers for all these studios, I recognized them. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to each booth, and I would go up to each booth, and I would see their name tag. I'm like, oh, you're so-and-so from MTV, or you're so-and-so from Nickelodeon. Hey, it's me, John Fountain. We've spoken on the phone a few times. If you recall, I submitted my work. And they were always like, oh, yeah, nice to, put a face to the name, blah, blah, blah. Oh, it's so nice to see you. And I was, and at every booth, I said this. I was like, look, I know I missed the job fair. I know I'm not going to be able to, sit down and show my portfolio, but I just wanted to meet you in person because we had spoken on the phone so many times. And I just want to say hello, and it's nice to meet you, and yada, yada. And at every single booth, they were like, oh, really? Well, have a seat. We'll look at your portfolio now. Now, of course, I felt kind of bad that they allowed me to cut in front of the line of other people, but there you have it. What was I supposed to do? Say, oh, no, let these 300 other people go first. So, by the way, to make up for that, the way that I sort of paid penance for that little sin was for the 5 years following that, I would volunteer to go look at portfolios for the studios every year thereafter. So, okay, yes, I cut in line, but I also did my very best to make up for that. So anyway, every single booth at every single studio sat down and looked at my portfolio. And they all had nice things to say. And in fact, the MTV people were like, "Oh, we're doing a sort of revamped version of Liquid Television. It's going to be called Cartoon Sushi. Maybe you can submit some stuff to us." And so I got a pretty good reaction from all of them. But when I went to the Nickelodeon studio, they looked at my work, and the guy who looked at my work was the producer of a new show that they were coming up with called, you guessed it, The Wild Thornberrys. And he looked at my portfolio and he's like, "Oh, wow, you can actually draw." And I was like, "Well, I mean, I guess, can't everybody here?" And he's like, "No, you'd be amazed at some of the crap we've had to pour through today." So he liked my work a lot. And he was like, "Hey, tell you what, I really like your drawings. I really like your level of experience. Um, uh, would you be willing to take a storyboard test?" He said to actually, I said to him, "I really want to be a character designer," and he's like, "Well, we don't have a need for character designers right now. We have a need for storyboard artists. Can you do storyboards?" And I'd never done a real storyboard before in my life, and I was like, "You bet I can." So he was like, "Well, would you be willing to take a storyboard test? We're starting up this new show called The Wild Thornberrys." And I was like, "Absolutely, I would love to take a test. Love to take a test." So he's like, "Great." We exchanged information, and he was like, "It may take a couple months, but we'll get back to you and we'll give you a storyboard test." I was like, "Yes!" So the whole job fair thing went great. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this networking thing is unbelievable." So um, so I leave the job fair feeling amazing. So now I'm just walking around the convention and walking from booth to booth, and I keep seeing posters for closing night gala, $50. And what it was for $50 you could buy a ticket to the closing night gala, where there would be food, drinks, and dancing. And of course, you could also use that opportunity to network and hobnob and what have you. And I was like, "Well, now I got to spend this money on that, because now that I've actually gotten a small nibble here, I've got to parlay this and I've got to keep going. I got to ride this wave." So I'm like, "Okay, I've determined I'm going to spend my $50 to go to the closing night gala." So as I'm walking around the main room and all the booths are starting to close down, I hear a woman at the Universal Studios animation booth say to the woman at the Paramount Studios animation booth, "Hey, I've got like 4 extra tickets to the closing night gala. Do you want any of mine?" And she's like, "No, I've got 3 that I'm not using myself." And so I looked at them and I'm like, "Can I have one?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure. Do you want like 5?" And of course, I didn't even know anybody in the entire city, so I was like, "No, no, just one is good." So they gave me a free ticket. So once again, $50 saved, $50 earned, and um, and plus I'm thinking to myself, "Hey, there's free food at this. There's free food. There's the chance to hobnob, the chance to network some more. So hot diggity." So now I'm having the time of my life in Los Angeles at this convention. So I got a couple hours to kill, which I did. I went to my car and very surreptitiously changed into my interview clothes so that I looked all nice. Um, and I went to the gala event. And at that event, I saw the producer from Klasky Chupo, who is from the Wild Thornberrys. And he was there with, I'm presuming, his date. And he introduced me to his date. And she's like, "Hey, this is the guy I was telling you about." And so that just gave me a real charge, because keep in mind, it was just a few hours ago that I was feeling like I had made the biggest mistake of my life. So now I'm feeling great about things. I'm feeling super confident. I wound up meeting a very nice young lady at that event, who I wound up being my first girlfriend in Los Angeles. Um, Had a blast, shook some more hands, met some more people, saw some major superstars. One of the first people I saw there was Peter Chung. I'm like, "Holy crap, that's Peter Chung!" And I had been obsessed with Eon Flux, and so I did him the favor of not fanboying on him. But it was super duper cool. Here I was at a Hollywood Los Angeles party. It wasn't in Hollywood, but for me, Corn Chucker from Kalamazoo, Michigan, this was the big time. And all the biggest names in animation were there. And so I was just like, "Wow, I could get used to this." Now, what happened is, and I usually skip over this part of the story, is what happened is I left, went back down to San Diego, feeling really just amazingly great about things, and I had started getting the same word of mouth from Klasky Chupo as I got from LucasArts. They didn't want to hire you unless you already lived in Los Angeles. So, and they had let me know that it was probably going to be a couple of months before they would start staffing up for the Wild Thornberries. So, um, so I had that amount of time to get a Los Angeles address. So my big move when I got back to San Diego is, okay, I am motivated now. I have got to get a job in Los Angeles bad, because I need to have an LA address when they're ready for me to take the storyboard test at Klasky Chupo. Now, fortunately, one of the people that I had worked with at one of the other CD-ROM studios knew somebody who had a similar game studio in Los Angeles, um, and they were called SoundSource Interactive, and they were probably one of the very last CD-ROM studios in existence. And I got an interview with them, and they were based in Los Angeles. And after getting many, many, many rejection letters from other places, both in Los Angeles and San Diego, they hired me to come to their studio as, believe it or not, an art director and an animator for their CD-ROM studios. And one of the first things that I got put on was I was the art director and character designer for the Free Willy 3 interactive storybook. Um, Getting this job allowed me to get a very, 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 I literally think my apartment was somewhere around $99 a month in Canoga Park, California, which is part of the Valley in Los Angeles, and it's very well known, or it was well known at the time, for being the hub of pornography and lots of gang shootings. So that's why it was so cheap. And I had no furniture at this point, so I bought an air mattress, a folding card table, and a plastic patio chair for this apartment. Moved to Los Angeles, started working at this place, and this wound up being sort of my biggest claim to fame at the time, because this was a Warner Brothers production. Free Willy was a big franchise at the time, so, and this was the sequel to their sequel. But what's interesting is, in order to be the art director for this, they sent a limo to me in the valley where I worked to take me to the Warner Brothers studio lot so that I could have a screening of Free Willy 3, so that I could get inspired to be the art director for this interactive storybook. Um, which they did. And of course, at the time, I'm like, wow, this is the big time. And this game, if you look at this game, it looks like I drew it, and it looks like I designed it, which makes sense because I did. Um, and what's funny is, later on, I was told the game did terribly, and that people hated the character designs in it because everyone they said everyone looked perverted and weird. So anyway, so now I'm at least a little bit stable and working at yet another CD-ROM studio, and I'm just sort of I'm counting the seconds for um, Nickelodeon to call me, or not Nickelodeon, for Klasky Chupo to call me. Oh, and by the way, speaking of artifacts, I wanted to show this. When I was driving from Michigan to California, uh, again, bearing in mind, no GPS, no satellite, no, just a road map and the directions that I got from AAA. And this was the cell phone that I took on the drive out there to, yeah, look at it. It's like the size of brick, and the reception was terrible. But this was a big deal to have, and this was my emergency thing. My parents got this um, for free with a new Toyota that they bought, so they gave it to me to take out to California, so that I had a way of communicating and letting them know if I was okay and all that stuff. So anyway, I'm literally I'm sitting around waiting for the call from Klasky Chupo. But here's the thing. Um, by now I was a little more hardened because I had been burned a few times. So even though I was really pretty sure that I was going to get the call from Klasky Chupo, um, I was like, well, I've got to hedge my bets. If I had learned anything at this point, especially from the experience at LucasArts, if I had learned anything, it's that you've got to hedge your bets. So at the job fair, I picked up other tests from other studios, and this is how I killed time in between those two jobs. This is my character layout test for The Simpsons, which they told me was terrible. Yeah, this is just practice. And it's funny because, yeah, it just, to me, I look at this and I feel like that's not so bad. But boy, they hated it. And this would begin a very long line of experiences where, boy, when it comes to shows like The Simpsons or Futurama or King of the Hill or anything, boy, those shows want nothing to do with me. I just don't, my style did not gravitate towards that. But it was really interesting because this was my first look at how, sort of, oh, these are what model sheet packs look like. So again, even though I was taking these tests and not getting any money for them, I was learning a lot about the industry. So anyway, I'm working on Free Willy 3, biding my time. Not really enjoying the job, but just at this point, I'm so grateful that I actually have an income and a place to live and the stability. So I was now very used to saying, okay, this is not the thing I want, but this is the thing that could lead to the thing. So eventually, thank goodness, Klasky Chupo did call, and they were like, hey, we're ready for you. Do you want to take the storyboard test? And I was like, you betcha. And the thing is, well, they're like, we don't have the storyboard test for the Wild Thornberrys worked out yet. So we're going to give you a storyboard test for Rugrats. And so they gave me, I think, something like 2 pages of Rugrats script. And this may be the only full page of my storyboard test that I have left. Just making sure my name and phone number are on. Yeah. So this is one of the pages from the storyboard test, and it was this test that led to my job at Klasky Chupo, which is where my animation career really, really took off. Because what's fascinating, or are these my thumbnails for it? Yeah, they are. Here are my thumbnails for my storyboard test. I'd never drawn these characters before in my life. Of all of the Nickelodeon shows from that golden era, Rugrats was the one I probably watched the least. But anyway, they saw my test, they liked it, and I finally got the phone call saying, we'd love to have you on the Wild Thornberrys. Please, show up. So, holy cow. Can you imagine if I hadn't taken the exit and gotten off into Los Angeles for the animation celebration? So as I said, I went in for the final interview, and I tried one last time. I was like, guys, I really, really think I'd be better as a character designer. Do you have any slots for character designers? And no, we are full up on character designers. We have enough character designers. We really need you to do storyboards. Can you do storyboards? So I'm like, oh, you betcha I can. Now, again, not being one to take anything for granted, in the interim, I had been studying storyboards. So by the time I actually got to the studio, I was at least this much prepared. But what I did, as soon as I got in the studio, was I started looking around at the people I was working with and seeing what they were doing and seeing how they did it, and basically copying off them and learning from them. And that wound up being a just vitally important part of my career because storyboarding, and I've said this many times before, it is the hardest job in the animation pipeline. You have to be an illustrator, you have to be an animator, you have to be a director, you have to be able to design backgrounds, characters, locations, vehicles. You have to be able to do it all, and you have to be able to tell the story visually. Um, and so this is, I believe, my very first storyboard page for my very first story. This is a photocopy. This is not, you know, this is not the original. I'm pretty sure they kept the original. But one of the things, because I didn't really know how storyboarding worked, um, I I would sort of over storyboard my storyboards, which means I would do a lot of in betweens. I would, I was desperately trying to cover up for the fact that I didn't know what I was doing. So I would over storyboard my storyboards and add just tons and tons of poses. And um, what's funny is, it was around this time that I started to realize that what made my Thornberry storyboards stand out from a lot of the other people I worked with was that my acting, the character acting and stuff in the storyboards, was a lot more detailed and a lot more nuanced and expressive. And one of the reasons I was able to do that was way back in college when I was just sort of biding my time. I took all kinds of different classes in college. I took acting, I took public speaking, I took improv. I took all these different things, and all of these things wound up helping in my storyboards because my storyboards, like I said, had a much more sort of nuanced acting and nuanced posing and stuff like that. I didn't just revert to the same storyboard poses that everybody goes to. The whole like, oh, I am talking about a thing, and then we are going to do that thing over there. I would always try and come up with stuff that was really different. And um, one of the other big lessons to take away from all this is, yes, I knew how to draw, but my drawing was really sort of, compared to all these people that I was working with who had gone to RISD or Sheridan or CalArts or all of these other much more prominent, sort of art schools, is I had to bring something to the table that nobody else could bring. And if that's one of the other big lessons to take away from this video today, is there's always going to be someone who can draw better than you. There's always going to be someone who has more experience than you. There's always going to be someone who can do the job better than you. What's important is that you have to figure out what can you bring to the table that nobody else can bring. And in my case, it had been, not just the experience of writing every day for the school newspaper, drawing every day for the comic strip, acting, taking those classes, doing all that stuff, but not just that, but having all of the experiences of driving through the Colorado Rockies in the rain, being lost, just all of these things made me a better storyteller. So even though there were lots of people I was working with, and my directors at that time were incredibly frustrated with my draftsmanship and how sort of they described it as novice, and they were right. My perspective was still terrible. I had lots of flaws, but one thing that everybody always agreed on was that I brought something that other people didn't bring, and I never would have been able to bring those specific things if I hadn't moved out of my hometown, if I hadn't moved away from my parents' house, if I hadn't taken risk after risk after risk. So what I've, I guess, as I'm wrapping this up, the real lesson is pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, whether it's in big ways or in small ways. That is how you learn. And I'm not just talking about learning how to draw or learning how to animate. That's how you learn to cope. That's how you learn to improvise and how to pivot on a dime when you're thrown into a situation that you don't know how to deal with. All of these experiences that led to my animation career have not just helped me in my animation career, but they've helped me in life. Like I said, prior to a lot of these experiences, I was very keen to keep to myself, and I didn't particularly like talking to people, and I always felt like the weird person who should just stand off in a corner and not say anything to anybody because nobody ever understood what I was talking about, blah, 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 blah. I would just always lose myself in my drawings. And, the idea of networking and hobnobbing and talking to people or making a YouTube video and putting myself out there this way, all that stuff was completely alien to me. And completely outside of what I considered to be my wheelhouse or my comfort zone. And yet it is all of these things that has contributed to me, not just having a career that went better than I had ever really expected it to go, but also in having a life that was more rewarding than I could have expected, or hoped for. You know, it was getting used to handling adversity. Ever since then, even after, famously, I got the job at Klasky Chupo, and after I got the job at Klasky Chupo, I started pitching shows. I've told the story before, so I'm not going to go into that again. But pitching shows led to me pitching shows at Nickelodeon, which is where I got my start from Fred Seibert, and where I got my first pilot, and where I got my first development deal. That's how all this. That's where all the balls started rolling. Um, and if I had never taken that first sort of leap of faith and done that big scary thing, none of that would have ever happened. But experiencing all the hardship of getting to that point, since then, even though I had this fantastic career, and I continue to really be grateful for the work that I do today. I've experienced countless curveballs that life has thrown at me. Some of them extraordinarily tragic, and some of them extraordinarily heart wrenching that I'm not going to go into today. But when I think back, I never could have handled those things if I hadn't first pushed myself outside of my comfort zone. And again, to wrap up, if you're going to take anything away from this video today, which I'm sure is probably way crazy long, so if you're actually seeing this part, thank you for sticking around this long. But that is the lesson. Push yourself, challenge yourself. Yes, it's frustrating. Yes, it doesn't feel good, but that's how you build muscle, and that's how you toughen yourself. And when you've got those tools at your disposal, you really can take on anything. And that's how I feel now in life. I've been through so much, and even just in recent years, I've been through some really, really, really tough times. But thank goodness I had those other times before that, those other challenges, those other things, which at the time just seemed like absolute misery. And I had no idea at the time, like, oh, no, 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 this is toughening you up for what's to come later. And look, I'm not saying that absolutely everybody should pick up and move, and that absolutely everybody should try and replicate the path that I had. No, if anything, it's not the exact opposite, but it's the opposite. You should look at what it is you want and what it is you expect to get out of life, and tailor your experience to that. And as I said, a lot of people, they know what they want to do, and they go, okay, well, I'm just going to keep working at the craft, working at the craft, working at the craft. And yes, you have to work at the craft, but if you do not challenge yourself with things that come outside of the craft, you're not going to have a unique perspective to bring to the table. Again, I firmly believe one of the reasons that I became such a hit on The Fairly Odd Parents when I got made a director on that show was because I was so good at pitching. Well, I was so good at pitching because I had taken classes in public speaking. And I had performed in an improv troupe when I lived in Detroit. Constantly look for ways to scare yourself into learning something that you wouldn't have learned otherwise, because it feeds your creativity. If all you ever do is draw the same anime character over and over again, and if you never leave your basement, and if you never leave your comfort zone, you're not going to get the perspective necessary to tell compelling stories. And let's face it, that's what animation is. And I don't care if you want to be a character designer, I don't care if you want to be a storyboard artist, director, prop designer, background designer, no matter what. This is what I learned to love about animation, was that every single person in the pipeline is helping you tell this story. And the way to become a great storyteller is to have a perspective. And the only way to have perspective is to have experiences. And the only way to have experiences is to get out of your basement and push yourself outside of your comfort zone. Hey everybody, I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching this video. Please consider what I said at the beginning of the video. I'm not going to go into the whole spiel again, but please like, share, and subscribe. I really, really hope this has been enlightening to you in some way. I hope you've found something from this video that you can apply to your own life. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out in the comments below, or look me up on Twitter. I'm all over social media, and I really do love helping people, which is why I started Fountain's Pen Productions in the first place. So please like, share, and subscribe to Fountain's Pen Cartoons. Again, I do this for two reasons. One, of course, to help the channel, and the other reason is because it really does give me sincere fulfillment. So I would love to hear from you. Thank you for watching. I am on your side. I wish you nothing but happiness and success. Zig zag ah, party people.